How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on Tuesday, September the 3rd, to bring you guys some more coverage of the NFL leading up into the first couple games of the NFL regular season. We're going to start talking about some of those games coming up on Thursday and Friday specifically with some of these segments. The first one covering that Brazil game on Friday, the first ever NFL game to take place in South America. All very exciting, but there are some concerns starting to come up amongst some of the players, so we're going to get into what some of those concerns are. And also, in this first part of the show, we're going to get into looking at some of the games from all of Week 1, and I'll give you guys my top 5 must-watch games of Week 1, which games I'm most looking forward to watching this week, plus some honorable mentions as well, because there are a lot of good games. It was hard to pick just 5, so that's coming up in the first part of the show. More to come as we go through the rest of this episode, but before we do start, guys, the NFL is starting. I just mentioned that. More games are coming up, more coverage around these games, which brings up more of an opportunity to discuss and debate some of these things we see over the weekend. So with that being the case, now more and more, I'd love to know what you guys are thinking. I'd love for you guys to share your opinions, your comments, or any questions that you may have on any of the live shows that we do across this network. And it always adds a lot with your guys' insight and input. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your messages stand out in any of our live shows, make sure to go check out our new feature, which is the Super Chat feature that you guys can find at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat with this new feature. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But if you do prefer the old method, that is still available. The old tip and donations link you could still use at gsmcpodcast.net. You can still use that with any comment or question if you may have it. With that, we couldn't do this show without your amazing support, and we're always so thankful for you guys for your interactivity with these shows and also just being part of our community. But now we can jump into the first segment, right? The Brazil game. I think one of the most exciting games to look forward to this week, not just because of the environment, the setting of everything, right, but because we have two great teams playing on Friday. The Packers and the Eagles will be featuring in the NFL's first ever game in South America. That, along with some of the other international games, a few in London and also a few in Germany. It's groundbreaking moves from the NFL, but with all the excitement from us fans, right? Getting a game in a different location, for fans in a new environment, in a whole new country, whole new continent. From the players' perspective, there does seem to be some concerns with this game, specifically this time around from some Philadelphia Eagles players. One of them being Darius Slay. During one of the recent episodes of his podcast, Big Play Slay, Darius Slay wasn't shy about sharing some of his displeasures about going down to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and playing in the first ever game there for the NFL. He wasn't too shy about sharing his comment pretty much. He said, "I do not want to go down to Brazil. You want to know why? I'm going to tell you why. They already told us not to leave the hotel. They told us we can't do too much because the crime rate is crazy." I'm like, NFL, why would you want to send us somewhere with a crime rate this high? And he also tacked on after that he told his family to not even bother to show up there because he is, again, just most likely going to stay in his hotel. And this statement follows up an earlier one from one of his teammates in AJ Brown, who sort of explained the warning that the NFL gave the players, all of the players obviously participating in this game, about the do's and don'ts while they're down there in Brazil. AJ Brown commented beforehand, and he said, "We had a meeting and there were a whole bunch of do's and don'ts, so I'm just trying to go down there and win a football game and come back home. But after hearing all this stuff, I'm probably going to be in my room." And it sounds it doesn't sound great from a player's perspective if you're looking at it and you're trying to expand the game, obviously, with these international games, but obviously the players are the product, right? They are the ones on the field putting on the show and everything. And in an ideal world, right, you'd want the players to be happy about going and expanding the game everywhere, bringing it to new areas and things like that, right? But these two guys aren't the first ones to mention it. Josh Jacobs back in June was another player on the other side of things to bring up his concerns, and he was a little bit more, I think, overreactive with some of the things that he communicated that the NFL was telling them, but later he sort of apologized for it. But now you get some of the similar concerns from the Eagles players, and again, it doesn't look great if you're on the outside looking in, if the players are a little bit unsure about it. And I think from one point of view, I think that just comes from the speculation, the worries, the uncertainty, right? I don't know how many of these players have gone down to South America or anything. I don't know how many have actually been in Brazil or anything like that, how much they know about the sporting, athletic culture down there with mainly soccer, right? All of that wrapped up into one has to do with some of the uncertainty and some of the worries, right? Obviously, from these NFL players. And again, going back to that point about soccer, the fandom experience down there, if you haven't caught a game in any league or tournament down there, it's very same and very different from what it is in the NFL or any sporting event here, because I think it's a little bit more of a controlled chaos here in the NFL. You have some places that get very loud. You see some fans go over the top here in the NFL or in any sporting event here in the United States, but down there it gets a little bit more, I'm going to say hostile, but I mean it in the nicest way possible, if that makes sense. You know, it's a little, just exactly that, a little bit more just chaotic, it might seem, from anybody who's just watching it for the first time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that with the NFL, because I don't know how many football fans there are down there in Brazil. There could be a lot, and then we could be seeing, one, in a positive way, a lot of fans that are right excited about the NFL, but in another sense, it could get to a point where it might overwhelm a lot of people because they're not really used to it or they don't really know what the culture is down there. So all of that is sort of wrapped up into this concern and main problem that you have with these players. Just one, traveling. I don't know how many hours it is, but it is a long flight going directly from wherever they're flying from all the way down to South America. So that's one thing, right? Taking that long trip, and now you're in a completely different place. You don't know the language or anything like that, and you might want to get to know it, but again, going outside and trying to explore those areas around just outside of football is a little bit concerning, and seeing some of the players say that they're just going to stay in their room doesn't really convey a positive message with how the NFL has planned this, or how maybe they're not considering the player's point of view in a lot of their decisions. And news to everybody, that's not always how the NFL does their business, right? They don't necessarily always concern the player's point of view, but in this whole, I think, plan, this, I would say, 4 to 5 year plan now that the NFL is trying to expand their game out globally now, the player's perspective isn't necessarily the first priority, right? I think most people would admit that. And what sort of message does this, convey about the NFL? I think mainly that they are very committed to expanding their game globally, right? You have not only these South American games, but they're talking about maybe having some in Canada, back in Mexico City. I know they're going to have one in Spain next year as well. There's talks about Australia, Ireland, Italy, I've heard as well. There's a bunch of different places where this is starting to expand to, and obviously it's very intriguing for the NFL to expand it as much as possible. But I think another message that this sort of conveys is that they kind of speed this process up a little bit and might sort of plan it a little bit too early, if that makes sense, for some of the players, and for some real deep dives into how to get the best experience for everybody, right? Not just the fans, but the broadcast and the players as well. You want everybody to have a positive experience about this, right? Because if some things go wrong, like in this Brazil game, the game itself is obviously going to be watched by millions of people, right? But there's also going to be some looking at how everything goes smoothly with the hotels or the travel from the hotel to the stadium, the field conditions, the locker rooms. And then once the game actually starts, you hope that nothing goes wrong during the game that, I don't know, maybe stalls it or just doesn't look as well as maybe a game played at Lincoln Financial or Lambeau Field or something like that, right? All those little things are going to be looked at and analyzed, and then afterwards say it isn't a great experience from the players. You don't want a case where the players come back and they're asked about it and they just, trash it or something like that, or speak honestly about it in not the brightest of lights, so to say. So that's something that ideally the NFL wants to avoid, and you want everything to go smoothly. And there are going to be some problems I'm anticipating, which comes with exploring these new areas, right? But I think overall, it is a good thing that they're expanding, but maybe I think it would be fair to say that they maybe arranged this a little bit too quickly without really knowing or informing a lot of the players of what could go down. They've tried to now, but I think even still, they haven't done it in the best way possible. And this could be a learning experience, obviously, from it. This is one of the first times they're really trying to grow it out to a different place they've never been to. So at the end of the day, they could just try to learn from it. It's going to happen anyway. It's not like the NFL really is too concerned, honestly, about what the players are going to say at the end of the day, but it's really going to come down to, how everything goes smoothly with the game. There's no problems with anything like that. And if that happens, this is just going to speed up the process a little bit more with those games in Spain, Australia, Ireland, and how it all gets ironed out. It's going to be a learning process from this Brazil experience, and maybe there could be some more South American games to come in the near future, but that is, I guess, a little bit of the negative side with this. The players are feeling a little bit uneasy about it. I'm sure they're probably going to travel either tomorrow or I'm assuming tomorrow because the game's on Friday. So it is gearing up. We are getting closer and closer to the start of these games. And on the topic of those games, we're going to go into our next segment after this short break. But in that next segment, we're going to talk about some of the most anticipated games I have on my schedule of games that I think are going to be the most must-watch games of Week 1. I picked 5 from the slate of Week 1 games. I also included some honorable mentions. There's some good ones, and I'm going to provide those to you once we return from this break. So don't go anywhere. A lot more to cover on today's show. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and we're going to look at some of the games here in Week 1, not just the ones on Thursday and Friday. Those are also going to be included in this next segment. We're going to be looking at the top 5 must-watch games of Week 1. I went through the slate of games. There's a lot of good ones to pick from. Obviously, the NFL did a good job of scheduling these Week 1 games, and it was hard to pick just 5, so I wanted to start off with some honorable mentions that do have their own storylines to carry in Week 1. One of them being the Steelers taking on the Atlanta Falcons. the conversation around Arthur Smith going back to face his old team in Atlanta. Nonetheless, you look at the Falcons and how much better they've gotten just over this offseason, adding Kirk Cousins, Justin Simmons, Matthew Judon, new head coach, new offensive coordinator. They're feeling really, really good about this season, and I think a lot of people would agree with that sentiment. And then you look at the Steelers, new offensive coordinator, obviously, with Arthur Smith, two new quarterbacks, Russell Wilson officially named the starter. So how do not only Russ but Kirk Cousins start off the season with new teams? Also, they added players like Patrick Queen. They drafted a lot of young players that they are very open to probably starting right away, with Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, among those guys. So a lot of storylines there, but it didn't make the list. Another game that was close was the Texans at the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously for the Texans, very amped up offseason, bringing in a lot of great players, Danielle Hunter, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, obviously, to just build off of the great season that they had last year. A big year for CJ Stroud if he takes that next step. And then similarly for the Colts, you look at last year how these games got a little bit heated, obviously being divisional games, but the Colts playing up to the competition a little bit. Are they able to do that? More so now with Anthony Richardson hopefully staying healthy and with all the additions the Texans made. A lot of storylines there, but again, just missed out. And then just quickly here, the Jaguars and the Dolphins was another one. Two quarterbacks that got paid very well this offseason, but I feel like they were just close, just missed out on that cutoff for the list. And then I couldn't leave off the Ravens and the Chiefs, another one kicking off the season in a few moments. But to start off on the top 5, to finally get to my list here, I wanted to start off with changing it a little bit because some of these games I think were a little predictable to name as some of the most top 5 must watch. So I wanted to change it up a bit, and I wanted to start off with number 5. One for me that I'm really excited for is the Tennessee Titans traveling to Chicago to take on the Chicago Bears. The home and NFL debut overall for Caleb Williams. Also, the debut for new Titans head coach Brian Callahan. A lot of turnarounds with these two teams. I think these two teams, the Commanders probably and the Texans to some extent, were the squads in the offseason that really did a lot to change their rosters. You look at the Tennessee Titans, they've added a lot on offense just alone. Tyler Boyd, Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, and also on the other side, the Bears have added Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift. A lot of firepower on those offenses as well. So that's on one side of the ball. Then you look at the other side, and the Titans did a great job as well of adding guys like L'Jarius Sneed, Chidobe Awuzie, Jamal Adams, Quandre, and some other playmakers they have on their team already. So they're very, very well-rounded on both sides of the ball. It's just a matter of how quickly they can piece everything together. And then the Chicago Bears really maybe didn't add a lot because they already were very well stocked up on the defensive side of the ball with Jalen Johnson. He got a big extension this year. Montez Sweat proving his value last year in the trade. Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards. They have a lot of good players on both sides of the ball, and it could come down to the second-year development of Will Levis and also how he plays against Caleb Williams, right? The first overall pick. How quickly does he look like the face of the franchise? Because I think he's going to be great for the Bears, obviously, but how quickly can he get to that step and show it in the NFL? And then Will Levis learning a whole new offense, trying to command all these weapons game, but just one game that beat it out. For the number 4 spot, I have the Dallas Cowboys and the Cleveland Browns playing on Fox at 4:25 p.m. Eastern Time. And I mentioned that it's going to be on Fox because this is the debut of Tom Brady on his podcasting journey in this new career venture that he has. This is going to be the first game that we're going to hear Tom Brady on the call alongside Kevin Burkhardt. So that's something to be excited about. I'm very interested to see how Tom Brady does. But on the field, we have two quarterbacks that I'm very interested in, not just in this game, but overall in this year and how it plays out for both of these guys. Just noticing both of them number 4 as well. Dak and Deshaun Watson, obviously, very intriguing storylines for a couple different reasons. Dak, the iciness, the cold relationship that has now become him and Jerry Jones with some of his comments. Jerry not really providing a great answer as to when or if Dak Prescott is going to get an extension. So how does that play into this season? Are they going to let him play out this year on that final year? And how does that affect Dak? How does that affect his morale and everything like that? I don't think a lot of people are very high on the Cowboys this year anyway, so I can't imagine that this is going to make you feel any better about them. So that is one thing. And then on the other side, Deshaun Watson coming off of another tough year, dealing with injuries, now trying to make his way back from that shoulder injury as well. He seems to be all right, but obviously it's on his throwing shoulder, if I'm not mistaken. So the more he throws, the more he goes through this season. How does the wear and tear affect that shoulder? And then obviously maybe getting hit, some just unnecessary hits, unexpected hits. How does that all affect Deshaun Watson? Can he stay healthy this entire year? And then also, can we just see a little bit of the version that we saw in Houston? Because I think, at least for me, I've been let down from what I've seen from Deshaun. And the Browns have such a good roster that you can't have the quarterback be the lacking piece in the entire roster, especially in that division, especially because you paid so much money and gave up so much for Deshaun. This is going to be a huge year for him, trying to get back to the old version that got him paid so much money. So that's going to be a great game. Two good quarterbacks going up against very good defenses as well. Then at number 3, we have a playoff rematch from last year where the Lions beat the Rams 24-23 in Detroit. Now we have a rematch of that on Sunday Night Football at 8:20 p.m. Eastern Time. We have Matthew Stafford again going back to Detroit to take on his former team. His former team got the better of him, obviously, in that raucous environment in Detroit. But it was a very close game between both of those two teams. I think two teams that a lot of people have penciled in to be there in December, in January for the playoffs as well. And this game is not shy of the stars. You look at Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyren Williams, Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Sam Laporta. All these guys are going to bring a show on Sunday Night Football. It's going to be must-watch TV, both with big additions on their defensive side of the ball, the Lions addressing the cornerback position, the Lions addressing a lot of different positions as well on defense. And I think most of all, it's going to be a very good test to see where these two teams are just right off of the bat. How well do they play? How quickly do they knock the rust off from the preseason? And hopefully there's no injuries or anything like that. This should be a very good game to start off Sunday Night Football. Then, getting into the final two that I had on here, I have the Monday Night Football game. The Jets traveling across the country to face the San Francisco 49ers on the first Monday Night Football of the season. A great test, again, similar to the Lions and the Rams. This is going to be a great test for both of these teams. I think more so the 49ers looked upon as one of the best teams in the NFL, definitely in the NFC, and the Jets trying to get there and sort of trying to prove that they belong up there with some of the best teams. And coming off of last year, obviously Aaron Rodgers gets hurt. They're not able to show their full potential with the rest of their great players that they have. But now that everybody's back together for this to be the first game of the season, you have Aaron Rodgers taking on the 49ers yet again. Hasn't been a great record against the 49ers, so it should be an interesting matchup there. I'm anticipating Haason Reddick won't be there for the Jets, so that's a bummer. But for the 49ers, they got back Trent Williams, and they also got back Brandon Ayuk. So they should have their full team there ready to go. And it's a good opportunity, again, to see how the Jets incorporate all their new pieces, that revamped offensive line. Aaron Rodgers obviously having a full season most of a full season with Garrett Williams, Mike Williams being involved. How does Breece Hall look? A great matchup between two great running backs. Definitely close to being the game I'm most excited about. But at number one, we just talked about most of it off of the field, but I think the Packers and the Eagles on the field is just as exciting and newsworthy as anything that happens off the field, with all the hype around going down to South America, bringing the game down there. On the field, you have two of the best teams in the NFL and in the NFC, with two quarterbacks nearing the top, I think, of the quarterback rankings, or making their way up there in different ways, right? Because you have Jordan Love breaking out last year. Everybody is jumping on the bandwagon that is Jordan Love, buying into the hype, a lot of praise going his way. A lot of people believe the Packers can do something special this year because of Jordan Love. And then in a similar way, you have Jalen Hurts trying to make his way back up there. I think after a down year last year, he's sort of this year trying to remind everybody that this is the same quarterback that made it to the Super Bowl in 2022 and went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes. So both of them trying to get back up there, or trying to get to the top in both of their cases of those top quarterbacks in the NFL. You have also a lot of other things to look forward to, not just the two quarterbacks. You have the overall all-pro roster that the Eagles are going to have out there versus the Packers' young and exciting offense as well. Sirianni against Matt LaFleur, two young coaches in their respects. Then the two debuts for the Eagles' two new coordinators. How do they fare in a very good test against the Packers defense, and also the Packers offense for each of those guys. And again, just off the field, how smoothly everything goes, just going to add to the attractability of this game. It's definitely going to be, to me, the most exciting one, and we're going to get it relatively soon here, just in a couple days this week. But that makes up my list. Those are the games that I'm most looking forward to in week one. A lot of storylines, a lot to keep up, and I could have included a couple more honorable mentions, but I definitely wouldn't have been able to include it in this entire segment. So let me know what you guys think, reacting to my top 5 list, and letting me know if I missed out on a game, or if you guys are excited for these games for different reasons. But to move on with a new topic, I just alluded to it a little bit. We're going to talk about a question that I've been seeing pop up recently regarding the Chiefs and the Ravens, obviously playing in that first matchup on Thursday. The question I have is whether or not there's more pressure on Lamar Jackson this year, or on the whole Ravens team as a whole, to make it back to the Super Bowl and specifically beat the Kansas City Chiefs. Who has more pressure leading into 2024? We're going to get to answering that right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now, jumping into the action of this next segment, more of an open-ended segment. I'd like to include this on here, and we're going to get more of these as we get into the season, I presume, with all the different twists and turns and storylines that we see typically in the NFL season. But this one stood out to me just right off of the bat, because not only will Baltimore be traveling to Kansas City on Thursday in a rematch of that AFC Conference Championship game, everyone obviously looking at the matchup between Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. arguably the two best quarterbacks in the NFL, right? You have the reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson, and then going up against Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback, I think without a doubt, in the NFL, arguably the greatest of all time. He needs a few more Super Bowls actually, with Tom Brady to compete with him, but very much on the path there to that standard, right? Only 28 years old, and he's coming off of back-to-back Super Bowl championships. So that's the standard that we're dealing with these two quarterbacks, right? And it hasn't been for all those accolades that I could list off for Lamar and for Patrick, obviously. It hasn't been such an even matchup in the 5 matchups that they've had over their careers. You have Patrick Mahomes currently leading that series 4-1 versus Lamar Jackson all time, and more eyes on this game because of how I think Baltimore lost that game at home in the AFC Championship game back in January, right? They were the number 1 seed. They had home field advantage throughout the entire thing, and don't you know it, Patrick Mahomes walks in there, just beats Baltimore, only scoring 10 points, the Ravens, in that game, and leaving them very disappointed after a year where I think a lot of people believe that this was going to be their year, right? It's been a slow climb so far for the Ravens. You look back to how they started with Lamar Jackson, right? Very poor debut in the playoffs against the Chargers, I believe. Played awful. And then slowly, they made it past the next round. They had their little thing going with the Tennessee Titans. They eventually rose up above them, making it past them into the next round. Then Lamar gets hurt, gets eliminated. The Ravens get eliminated from the playoffs that next year. And then you have this year, right? You have this year where everything seems to fall in the right place. You have an awesome defense. Lamar just continuing his own development, passing the ball a little bit better. Zay Flowers coming in, drafting him as a rookie. A lot of good play from him early on. Just everything is going right for them offensively, defensively. They have one of the best records in the NFL. And again, I stress that last year, 2023, seemed like it was going to be their year. I think most people would agree that they were the best team of the regular season. They were the most dominant team, and they showed it, I think, mostly when they played in that Christmas Day game, or it was around New Year's or something like that, when they took on the 49ers and just absolutely kicked them out of their own stadium, unless it was in Baltimore. I can't remember where it was, but regardless of that, regardless of the other facts, they destroyed the 49ers, really making their claim to being the dominant team in the regular season, because up until that point, the Chiefs were dealing with a lot of different things, and regardless of all of that, there was still that doubt, right? There was still the fact that you had to go through Patrick Mahomes, and just like most people probably would have predicted, Patrick in the playoffs makes the difference, beats the Ravens, and now we're here. We're here at this moment. The first game of the 2024 season is going to be a rematch of that game, and while I do obviously acknowledge that this is not going to really affect either of these teams probably in the grand scheme of things, the playoffs, everything like that. We're a long way away from that. These teams could look completely different by then, depending on how the season plays out. So it's not going to affect anything in the grand scheme of it, but it does bring up this question now that they're facing each other yet again, and all eyes are going to be on these two quarterbacks, because I think the narrative around both of these teams is so sculpted around both of these guys for obvious reasons, right? The question, is there more pressure on Lamar, just Lamar personally, specifically in that matchup with Patrick Mahomes, or is there just more pressure overall on the Ravens to finally beat the Kansas City Chiefs and make it to a Super Bowl? And to me, just to get my answer out of the way, I think there is more pressure. I believe there's more pressure on Lamar Jackson to beat Patrick Mahomes for a couple reasons, right? The record itself speaks for itself. The 1-4 record, if you're Lamar Jackson against Patrick, is not a good look, obviously, just personally, because against every other team in the NFL, I think he's something like 57-13 all time against every other team. The only team he really struggles against that bad like he does with Patrick Mahomes is the Pittsburgh Steelers, which I believe he's 2-4 against. So that's pretty much it. Everybody else, he has a great record. I think like a 70-something% win percentage against every other team. So that's one thing that stands out, right? If you're so dominant like this, if you're Lamar and have so much success, talent-wise, production-wise, everything like that, it can't help, at least for me, bother you having these two blemishes, especially when one of them is the other most talented quarterback in the NFL, right? Because I do believe that these two guys, apart from any issues that the Ravens, that the Chiefs may have, I think having either of these guys as your quarterback masks a lot of the deficiencies that your team may face in the regular season, right? Going back to last year, Patrick, the issues were crazy with their wide receivers, right? Dropping everything. The offense just didn't look as crisp as it usually does. But regardless of that, they make it into the playoffs, obviously winning their division. And in the playoffs, the difference maker is Patrick being able to carry his team to the levels that they need to win those big games. And similar with Lamar, right? This year, you lose 3 starters on the offensive line. You do bring in Derrick Henry, which is a big help, but you lose some guys on defense. But even still, with all of that being a fact, I think most people still have the Ravens being one of the best teams in the NFL just simply because of Lamar Jackson. Not a lot of guys can really say they have that effect on their teams. Probably Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and that's probably about it in today's NFL. So these two guys stand out from just a talent standpoint. The struggle that Lamar has faced going up against Patrick Mahomes is another thing, obviously, and just that slow climb that I mentioned before. It's been step by step for the Baltimore Ravens getting to this point. They got to the AFC Championship game for the first time, and they lost. Now, if you continue this slow progression, you would think that the next step is finally getting over that and making it to the Super Bowl, because this team, honestly, going back to a point that supports the other side of this argument, as a team, they are too talented, similar to the 49ers, to not make a Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl. The Ravens are creeping into that territory, but now they are facing this next step, right? The final boss, if you will, the final test of getting to that promised land, which is the Super Bowl, finally slaying this dragon in Patrick Mahomes. And to do that, I think the biggest thing for me, why I believe there's more pressure on Lamar Jackson, is because when these two teams, when you have two situations that are so evenly matched, you have to look at different aspects of each team to try and convince you. If you're trying to pick a winner, right, you have to look at each team, which one fills you with more confidence, and that's the team you're going to go with, right? But it's very hard to pick a winner, a clear winner from these two rosters, because they are so well built. You look at the defenses, both of them are very, very good even still. Roquan Smith, Chris Jones, I'm forgetting the cornerback from the Chiefs, his name, Trent McDuffie, that's who. Elsewhere on the Ravens, Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Hamilton. Great defenses on both sides. Offensively, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, now Derrick Henry, Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy. Great offensive lines, great head coaches. So where is the difference going to show up in these games, right? The difference has to be these two quarterbacks. And then when you look at their matchups in some of these big games, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to deciding these games, the quarterbacks have to make the difference, and more often than not, Patrick has done that in these matchups against Lamar Jackson, and especially last year, because that one has left this bad taste in our mouths. If you're a Ravens fan or just watching that game, only putting up 10 points at home, having your defense put up great stops against the Chiefs offense and keeping you within reach of tying the game or anything like that. Again, for the offense to just fall short. And so much of the Ravens offense is built around Lamar Jackson, rightly so, right? Because he is so talented. But again, when you put up 10 points, because everything is so centered around you, you're going to be looked upon as one of the main reasons why this just didn't work out, right? Why this fell short, and only putting up 10 points doesn't sit well with a lot of people. If you lose in a way like Joe Burrow loses to Patrick Mahomes, he's the only other quarterback that has beaten him in the playoffs. But if you lose like Joe Burrow does in the conference championship game to Patrick, no one's really going to say anything because it's not like the offense really stuttered or anything like that. If you're Josh Allen even, losing last year on a missed field goal by your kicker, or that other year where the Chiefs score with like 10 seconds left to go in the game, those sort of losses aren't really so focused on the quarterbacks. But when you lose and only put up 10 points, that really speaks volumes, and it's more amplified that way, right? If that makes sense. And then also, I am putting a lot of pressure on Lamar just because that is the question, but it's not just Lamar that faces this pressure or is looked upon to beat Patrick Mahomes. It happens to virtually every quarterback. It's going to happen to CJ Stroud. It happens to Josh Allen. It's happened to Joe Burrow, even though he's beaten him. But the way everything happens with Lamar, the way that they lost in that game, I think they have no other choice but to avenge that. And I mentioned Derrick Henry before. That only gives you more reason to, have this game be more of a must-win for the Ravens, right, than it is the Chiefs, right? Because the Chiefs got better, obviously, but adding a guy like Derrick Henry to this Ravens team back there with Lamar and this running game, it's going to be a nightmare to stop. So adding a guy of that standard to your team already, it's not going to lessen any pressure or take off any of the burden because everything is still centered around Lamar. And it's not like he's oblivious to the fact. He knows that. He tried to downplay this first game, which was to be expected, but once it gets to those playoffs, I think you can't run from it. I think just embracing that pressure is going to be what is required for Lamar and this Ravens team to finally get over that hump. And it's going to be a challenge, right? No one is going to make it out of the AFC without beating the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. And I feel like already before the season started, I feel like it's going to have to be the Ravens just because of how everything's being built up around them, building up this mini rivalry of sorts, which is great, seeing great football towards the end of the year. But we have a long way to go till then. But in terms of this question, I think without a doubt, it has to be Lamar with more pressure to beat Patrick Mahomes at this point in time, which will take us to the end of that segment. 2 more segments to cover on today's show, giving an update on the Haason Reddick holdout thus far. All the 49ers players that were threatening of holding out are back with the team. Now it's just up to Haason Reddick. Will he miss time in the regular season? We're going to answer that question coming up in the next segment, and also going through the final predictions on the standings for each division, this time looking at the AFC East. So those 2 are coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, now looking at the holdout situation. All of these are getting knocked off of the board very quickly, right? We had Brandon Ayuk now off of the board. He signs an extension with the 49ers. Then we have Trent Williams just restructuring his current contract just today. That news broke today, so that's another one off of the board. CeeDee Lamb was knocked off a while ago, and now we're still stuck on Haason Reddick. We're still stuck on this situation with the New York Jets because it's been weeks since we last heard about anything regarding Reddick and a potential new contract. Still a debate of showing up versus showing up before or showing up after he gets that money, right? That still seems to be the problem. Haason doesn't want to step foot in the facility without getting his money. The Jets don't want to give him that money until, he shows any sort of commitment and just any sort of willingness to be there without that money. So that's where we are. We are still at this standstill between the two sides. Haason Reddick has been holding out throughout the entire offseason, not just training camp after he was traded back in the beginnings of April, So it's been going on for a while. Nothing has really moved. We've just heard a lot of back and forth. The Haason Reddick camp and obviously the player have requested a trade at this point, which almost you would think throw a wrench in this whole operation, but the Jets and their general manager Joe Douglas have doubled down and have said that they're not going to trade or explore any sort of situation of releasing or trading Haason Reddick. So while Reddick requested a trade, again, it doesn't really move anything. So we're still just stuck at where we are. Nobody moving until the other person decides to cave. And now we have another update from SNY's Connor Hughes, who reported that this is expected and could potentially carry into the regular season if both sides are very reluctant and very stubborn to show any sort of progression in this situation. Connor Hughes mentioned that this is so uncertain right now where it stands that Haason Reddick could report in the next 24 hours, or he could just continue to hold out and just not show up at all. It's very much right there teetering on the brink of being resolved in a matter of just a day, like he said, or just continuing for nothing to happen. So, reinforcing what I said before, Hughes also cited a bunch of sources close to Haason Reddick saying that he's willing to sit out this entire year if he has to, which isn't great for the Jets, right? And I'm going to get into that a little bit later in this segment. But again, General Manager Joe Douglas has no intention of trading or cutting Haason Reddick at this time. And Connor Hughes said in his next statement that the Jets insist they're fine without him. They're fine without Haason Reddick. Reddick says he's willing to sit out the entire year. Once it's clear that Reddick isn't a luxury but a necessity, he and his representatives can demand the contract that he desires. And that's going to be the next projected step in this saga that has turned out between Reddick and the Jets, right? If we're really committing into going into the regular season, the next sort of checkpoint milestone in this will be when either the Jets realize they don't necessarily need Haason Reddick, they're fine without him like they believe right now, because they do have a great defense, obviously, already. But adding Haason, I think, takes it to another level, obviously. So they are willing to go out there with the pieces that they have right now. And whether or not this point ever comes in the regular season where maybe you don't hope that it happens, maybe somebody gets injured or they are just struggling facing opposing offenses on their front, they realize that they don't have enough depth. Do they go to Haason Reddick? And in Connor Hughes' statement, realize that he isn't a luxury but a necessity for them to really get to their objectives in 2024. Or does Haason Reddick just decide to come back because they keep finding him each and every day, each and every week that he is not there? Who's going to cave first? That's going to be the next step in this progression. Once I do expect it to carry into the regular season, who comes to the realization first basically is going to be huge in this entire situation. Potentially missing out on that first game, obviously, for Haason Reddick, which isn't great for the Jets and their chances because Trent Williams, like I said before, he's figured out his contract with the 49ers. He's most likely going to be out there on Monday alongside Brandon Ayuk. So the 49ers have nothing to worry about. Yeah, they were preparing for any possibility that either of those players weren't going to be there, but they've obviously, figured everything out, and now the 49ers can just focus on just football. And realistically, it gets to a point now where you look at this situation and how it's kind of similar to the Jamar Chase situation and him holding in as well, right? Because those are the two main ones left at this point in time. Those are the only two situations that the teams have let carry out at this late of the offseason, right? Unless I'm missing one, which I don't think I am. Just trying to remember if I'm missing any. I don't think I am. Regardless, these are two of the biggest ones left at this point of the offseason. And if you're trying to compare them, obviously I think Jamar would be more important to the Cincinnati Bengals at this point in time, because when, Connor Hughes mentions that the Jets might come to a realization that Haason Reddick might be a luxury versus a necessity, there's no question that the Bengals need Jamar Chase, right? They need him. He is a necessity. There's no need to head into the regular season to figure that out. They already know that, right? Realistically, on the field, Jamar Chase is more of a need for the Cincinnati Bengals because they're not going to go anywhere remotely close to winning the division, playoffs, or anything like that without Jamar Chase. But the Jets are capable of getting there because their most important piece is going to be Aaron Rodgers, and he is healthy. He is ready to go for Monday. So it's not the same level there, but the point I wanted to touch on before on the Jets just realizing that just give him the contract basically at this point in simplest terms for Haason Reddick for a couple reasons, or just the main reason being that I think it really says a lot about the Jets and their intentions this year, whether or not they figured this out before the regular season, right? I think taking everything into account, the long journey that the Jets have survived through, getting up until this point, right? A lot of treacherous, awful years, bad quarterback play. You draft Sauce Gardner, you draft Breece Hall, you bring in Garrett Wilson. This defense is coming along. This offense is looking great. You just need the quarterback. You managed to go get Aaron Rodgers, right? He gets hurt. That year's thrown out. That's in the garbage last year. Now, everything is here in place for you to win right now. You've stayed put with this project. You've invested a lot in it. And now you have a chance to potentially make it even better and really commit to this short-term project that you've been building on for the last 5-6 years. For the Jets to get to the final step now and be right there with agreeing this extension with Haason Reddick, and now you decide to reconsider everything, maybe think that, you know what, we might be better off. Let's hold out and see where we are in 3 or 4 weeks or something like that in the regular season. You can't have that approach when you're so close to really committing to this short-term project, because that's what it is at the end of the day, because Aaron Rodgers, he's not here for 5-6 years. He's going to be here for the next 2-3 years. So that gives you, I think, a good window to extend Haason Reddick 3 years with an option in that fourth year or something like that, or a max of 3 years or something like that, to commit and go all into this project, right? Again, that you've just been building over the last 6 to 5 years to get to this final step and really solidify yourself as buying in. You're not hesitating. You're really committing to this project and sending it and just extending Haason Reddick before the season starts. I think that would send such a reaffirming message to not only the Jets fans, but everybody in the NFL, that the Jets are not playing around, that they're really going at it this year to try and change the narrative around this team, right? And have some prosperous years here with Aaron Rodgers. But to get to this final step, again, I'll say it, is confusing, and it's just unnecessary for how much work they've done to get to this point. Just give the man his contract. He's going to make this team better. They might not need him right off of the bat necessarily, but there's no doubt that it's going to make them better. And if you have that opportunity just sitting there, waiting for you to make a move, I don't know how you couldn't do it if you're the Jets, trying to just erase this negative energy that you've had around your organization for the longest times. Everything's going great for you right now. New O-line, Mike Williams comes in. You already have great young studs on your team already. Now you have the quarterback. Just make that final move and really commit to this plan. And there's no reason to have this man hold out the entire year. It doesn't have to get to that. I think the Jets should just commit to it and really just go all in on this year, because they're just standing in their own way without extending Haason Reddick, right? If you have such a luxury and almost a necessity sitting there, you're just standing in your own way at this point, knowing that you can get better, but you just decide not to for whatever reason. I think that's something that could come back and bite the Jets later on in the year, where depth is going to be such a huge thing, but hopefully they figure it out. I was going to say the deadline is something like tomorrow or Thursday, but the way that this has gone, I don't really expect that to be resolved. So I'm going to predict that this goes into the regular season, but it should not carry on any further than week 2 or week 3 at the most if the Jets are serious about being contenders this year. That's just how I feel about it. I don't know how you don't use Haason Reddick if he's just on your team, just sitting there, but hopefully the Jets come to their senses a little bit here and extend him the sooner rather than later, obviously. But that is that segment. We have one more to get to on today's show, just predicting the final standings in the AFC East between the Patriots, the Bills, the Jets, just talked about them, and the Miami Dolphins. So we're going to get to that right after this break. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining me back here on the last segment of today's show, talking about my predictions for how the AFC East division is going to shape out after the entire regular season. We are getting closer and closer to the start of the NFL season, so we're going to do some of these last predictions here, starting with the AFC East. We just talked about a few of these teams actually throughout today's episode, so we're going to start with one of them here at the 4th spot, and unfortunately, pretty obvious answer, I would say. The New England Patriots, to me, are going to come in last just this year. We're talking about the beginning, the very much the groundwork level of building this new era for the Patriots, right? We're in the Gerard Mayo era now. We're past Bill Belichick. Everything is pretty much new with this team. New general manager, new quarterback, a lot of young, exciting talent that they're ready to develop in the next couple of years. But right now, with how everybody else is in a more of a win now mode with their very settled, very experienced rosters, I just think the Patriots, with how everything's played out, you trying to figure out when to start Drake May, trying to figure out those issues that you had with the offensive line, new head coach, rookie head coach in Gerard Mayo, how does that all play itself out? And not to mention that they have the toughest schedule in the NFL from any of the teams that came in last place in all of the divisions across the NFL. Of all those teams that came in last, the Patriots have the hardest schedule out of all of them, so not really helping their case to surprise anybody in 2024. Again, the rest of the teams are just further along their processes, so I think the Patriots have a rough year this year, but that necessarily isn't a bad thing, right? You figure out a lot of things. I would love for them to keep Gerard Mayo. I don't want this to be a situation where they fire the head coach for no reason, obviously, knowing that this is a very early, young team. There's no reason to get rid of him because it's not going to be necessarily a pretty sight for this team this year. Everyone's going to go through growing pains, so the more consistent some of these factors stay, I think will only benefit the Patriots going forward. But to me, easy answer, they were going to be last. They are going to be last this year, in my opinion. Then you move on to number 3, and I think this could come to be a surprise to a lot of people, right? I'm just not buying the Bills hype for right now. I think it's too much. It could potentially be too much for Josh Allen, right? There's too many unknowns, and while you could feel great about some of those unknowns, like the wide receiver room, Khalil Shakir still being there, Keon Coleman, a lot of excitement around him, a lot of excitement around Dalton Kincaid and how everything plays out with him from his rookie year. I just feel like outside of that, how does the rest of this offense look? Their offensive line is pretty decent. They've done a great job, obviously, over the last few years, but there's a lot of unknowns for Josh Allen. Who's gonna become his number one target, right? Is it gonna be Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid? How quickly does Keon Coleman develop in this system? How, again, does James Cook develop in this system as their running back? Do they continue to be a run-heavy team to kind of mask some of the unknowns in the passing game, or do teams, double down on stopping the run, forcing them to pass, and are they willing to step up to that challenge? A lot of things that I'm just not sure of in the offense. It's very over-reliant on Josh Allen, I believe, and that's sort of what they tried to get away from last year when they went more towards a run-heavy offense, but because they had the weapons on the outside that they could still pass at an efficient level, now Stephon Diggs is gone, and I'm not sure that's going to mix well now with this young talent. So that's on the offensive side of the ball, but on defense too, losing guys like Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Tre'Davious White, and having Matt Milano get injured pretty much for the entire year, that's at basically every level, mainly the second to third level with Poyer, Hyde, White, and Matt Milano. That's a lot of your experienced leaders and guys that you just rely upon on that side of the ball are just gone now. And while you have guys like Ed Oliver, AJ Epinesa looking pretty good, that's just on the front line. They're not going to always stand up to a lot of these teams. And once you get to the second and third level, who's going to stand out and, make a stop for the Bills at that point in time? Those are some of the questions I have on the defensive side of the ball. And then I just feel like, again, it's too much pressure, not only on Josh Allen, but on that defense as well, because a lot of the times when Josh was coming up, developing, there was those issues with turnovers, but, I'm past it. But a lot of those times, this defense stood up, created some turnovers, and made a lot of splash plays. And now I'm not so sure they have the capability to rely on that defense as much this year with all those losses that I mentioned. And if they're able to figure something out, I feel like it's going to take time anyway with a lot of new pieces. So how do they navigate those waters, and how quickly do they get everybody up to speed? There could be some growing pains that I think could halt them in trying to win the AFC East title yet again. So that's why I kind of had them treading water at number 3. I feel like they're going to be good games here or there, bad games here or there. They're just going to be up and down all year, pretty much, is how I'm feeling about the Bills. Which means at number 2, very tough in the end, trying to decide between, obviously, the two teams left, the Jets and the Dolphins. But I went with the Jets here just because, obviously, the Haason Reddick thing is a distraction. And I just finished talking about how big of an impact he can have on the Jets if they just got out of their own way, essentially, with that last step. But you look at this team, the uneasiness, I think I would say, with Aaron Rodgers. Every Jets fan is praying every night that nothing happens to Aaron Rodgers again. He's coming off of a very serious injury to that Achilles, so how does he look? How does he navigate throughout an entire NFL regular season? Any injury, really, to some of these guys, like Mike Williams coming off of a serious knee injury, Aaron Rodgers, like I just mentioned, Breece Hall is a couple years removed now from a very serious knee injury himself, and their offensive line as well. Tyron Smith, known for not being the healthiest guy in his latter years in the NFL. You have Morgan Moses as well, dealing with some injuries over the last few years. Any injury to any of these guys, I feel like would really become such a problem to this Jets team, because all of those positions are very important in any team. So the Jets needing all these guys to stay healthy, I think, could be something to look out for. Again, it's so unpredictable to try and prepare for injuries because, you don't know when they're going to happen. But that is something that does make me a little bit nervous with this Jets team. And also, it's not like their schedule is overly hard. They have the 12th toughest schedule in the NFL. What's something interesting is that their bye week doesn't come until week 12. So that's a lot of repetitive games leading up until pretty much the other half of the NFL regular season. So again, going back to that health point, how healthy can they be until they get to that bye week? Are they going to get there and be, super relieved that it finally came because they are overwhelmed with the injuries that they have? Potentially, hopefully not. Or are they going to get there relatively healthy, recharge to all those players, and really attack the second half of the year with full intent, fully healthy as you can be? And that usually makes the difference when we're talking about week 12 to week 17 or week 18, who shows up the healthiest and who is in the greatest form at that point in time. Those usually make the biggest difference at that point of the year. So that's really what kind of worries me with the Jets. They have a great team, obviously. That's why it was such a hard decision. But that unpredictable aspect with injuries and how catastrophic it could be to the Jets, I couldn't put them at number one for that reason, which means that the Dolphins are obviously taking up that number one spot. They should have won the division last year. They were good enough to win it last year, but they choked away those 2 games to the Buffalo Bills. And the record against winning teams is a concern. They've lost their last 6 straight games against winning teams last year. Any team with a winning record, the Dolphins have just failed to beat them, and that's a pretty big concern. I'm not going to lie. That's something noteworthy to take into account, but I just feel like they do have one of the easiest schedules and the least difficult schedule in this entire division. So for the amount of talent that they have, the offensive firepower that can compete with anybody in the NFL, having one of the easiest schedules, I think, will benefit them greatly. But again, it'll go back to that question of, can they beat the good teams when it matters? And I don't know exactly how many of those great teams that they will face this year, but they're going to benefit overall from having an easy schedule with Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Devon A-Chain, Raheem Mostert, Odell Beckham Jr. once he becomes healthy, Tua being in a prove-it year, trying to validate that contract that he has. They have all the weapons, and I think that this offense is as good as any, definitely in this division, as good as any team in this division, as good as any offense in this division, arguably the best offense in terms of explosiveness and just can change the momentum of a game in any point in time. When you have guys like Waddle and Tyreek, that's the kind of level that we're talking about. And also, defenses, their defense does have some guys too. You look at Javon Holland, Jalen Ramsey, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips. Those guys did make a big impact last year, and I think just having another year under their belt together will be something to look forward to with this defense, having that continuity there. And Mike McDaniel, rightly so, getting a contract extension. I think he's definitely shown enough to be considered one of the best coaches in this division. No, well, actually, probably the best coach in this division, I would say. Sean McDermott's probably the other one, but Mike McDaniel, I think, has definitely proven a lot in just the 2 years with the Dolphins, and I think it says a lot. They did right by giving him that contract extension, and a lot of the times when you have a coach of that level, it tends to make the difference, and I think this year, everybody is facing this year with a lot more urgency, trying to win that division after just collapsing last year. I think they're facing this year with a lot more of a different mentality that will benefit them. And I think they're going to win it this year. I think they came close last year. They have enough to do it. And I think this year is going to be their year to give them as much of an advantage in the playoffs, right? To finally win a playoff game. But that's it. That's the predictions of the AFC East. Let me know if you guys agree, disagree with a lot of the points that I made. And if you guys have a different opinion, let me know in the comments section as well. But that'll wrap it up for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And to catch more of this show and more content around the NFL, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel too. Catch a lot more content around the NFL in a variety of different ways. And to catch more of these live episodes, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to discuss more topics around this league with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you once again, and I look forward to seeing you guys back here again tomorrow, just one day away from the start of the NFL regular season.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn.